have much to present. I don't have anything to present today, you'll be pleased to know. There's no slides. This is a discussion session. Right, so I'll carry on as we need to continue.
You might want to do a quick run through of your, for the people who hadn't seen.
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned about that though, because there's quite a few people on the call that have actually.
Oh right, okay, yeah,
so,
ignore me, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean maybe what we do is just see how things go, and then I can pick up on that. There are some interesting things happened since Graham and Ian, for example, saw what we've been doing. I've got a meeting with the HSE this afternoon. And we're following through the work that we've started in terms of the risk-based approach. So I'm going to give a bit of an update on that as well. So, but I think
maybe people can stay for 10 minutes at the end or something, George, if they wanted something like that.
Exactly, or we'll see how it goes. Good. Sorry, Alex.
That's fine, no problem at all. No, the more the merrier, definitely. So welcome everybody. If this is your first meeting, just to introduce myself, I'm Alex Oldman. I am at the moment sort of a co-chair for this operations group in BIM4Housing. So if you haven't dealt with BIM4Housing before, we're a cross-industry group looking at the adoption of BIM technologies and processes into housing in all areas. My particular area of attention is in social housing, and I'm a specialist in asset management systems. We're not going to do around introductions of everybody. I'm sure that if we get to meet up in the real world at some point this year, then we'll be able to introduce ourselves more generally. But I would encourage anybody who doesn't readily want to participate in the chat or unmute. If you've got any questions, if you just want to put a Q in the chat on the side here, or if you want to, if you've got any thoughts at any point, you put the letter T in, then that will hopefully attract my attention, and I can come to you to put your point across. So, so the operations group has been running a couple of years now. Last year was under the stewardship of Gary Bellinger, and we achieved reasonable success last year, I'd say, having been active throughout that whole process. And in general, if you're not familiar with the BIM4Housing.com website, and have a look there. There's a lot of the other groups, particularly the fire safety group, have been publishing some extremely useful documents on some suggested information that might be needed for specialist products that are being installed as part of fire safety, and that's obviously part of the information collection process towards achieving compliance with the golden thread. And anybody who's sort of getting started in BIM, have a look at those documents, and you'll start to see what we're all about is collecting digital information through the process of construction and handover to operations. And this particular group is focused on the ongoing operation and maintenance of our buildings through the occupation life cycle, when people are actually in those buildings. If they're commercial buildings, then when they're occupied by tenants, shops, whatever it might be, houses in our case, and then ultimately, I suppose, at the end of the process, demolition, deconstruction of those buildings. So that part of the life cycle. So everything from handover onwards is our particular area of interest. So I see that BIM's really helpful to ensure that the information that we need can be collected in an efficient manner, so that we're able to manage those properties properly right from the off. As soon as we get that handover, we don't have to have any dead time when people can't occupy the building yet because we don't know information about it. We should already have that information to hand as part of the BIM process. And that's what our group is about. Now, or at least that's what the operational phase of BIM is all about. So what this group is about is about getting together and sharing information and ideas. It's about going off and doing research if we need to, and bringing that information back to the group. It's about us having perhaps or sharing stories that we've got, and bringing up problems that we've got and discussing those as a professional network, in the idea that this is going to benefit us in terms of information sharing in the industry, generally speaking. So we've got an opportunity this year through a process of 6 formal meetings that are these sessions, the whole operations group, to form a series of working groups, which are going to go off and look at specific topics or area of interests that we've got. So not everybody here has to participate in everything, but if you've got a particular area that you're interested in looking at, that you want a group to look at, that you want discussions to happen around, perhaps research to happen on, then we can achieve that through this process, through this group. And then we can publish that information out through the BIM4Housing.com website. So what I'm trying to do today is organise ourselves in terms of strategy. What is it that we're trying to do for the next 12 months? What is it that we hope to achieve? And then how to organise ourselves in terms of looking for volunteers to look at the areas of interest that we might be wanting to discuss. I'm doing a lot of talking, but you'll see from the previous email, because I'm nearly there, that we've got a series of challenges, questions, which have already been put around the place. And these are questions which we're going to feed back to the main BIM4Housing sort of steering group, if you like, to say the team leaders are going to get together and share information. So we're really clear on what each individual group objective is going to be doing. So I suppose I'd like to start a general discussion point about the 6 points, but picking up on the first one, are there any specific problems that we are hoping to set out and resolve? If any of you are involved in BIM practice or any of you are new to this process, are there any challenges that you're coming across that we might be able to address? And I'll just open up the floor to anybody who wants to talk at this point, but if you want to put your hand up, that might, if there's 7 people all about to go for it. Okay, Mr. Marsh, fire away.
I'm not sure if it is the right group, but our challenges at this moment in time is to do with the operational use of BIM is the lack of information about legacy buildings, to say the very least. That when I've got a new build coming across, I'm getting BIM data coming across in a format that's already been agreed with the developers, etc. When we're trying to do it ourselves, starting off with nothing and then trying to create a BIM format that we can then when remediation happens or plan works happens, can be overwritten. That appears to be one of the major issues that we've got, because it's, I mean, we're trying to work out how to name it all. So we're looking at the hacked version of the, for identifying room, element, area, etc. But it's the legacy stuff where you're there and you're going, well, I've got no basis to do this on. I mean, how do you create that first dummy data set that then things can be imported from planned works, from remediation, these sort of areas? How do we get that? Is there an easy way for all of us to do that? So instead of us doing it 100 different times in 100 different housing associations, can we come up with a very basic thing that says, use this as your standpoint? That's the problems that we're finding. Well, one of them.
No, that's great. That's really, really good. Thanks, Paul. That's an absolutely brilliant start. So yeah, I see this as the problem of sort of retro BIM, how to establish, BIM information for existing buildings. You've talked about the challenges of naming conventions and talked about hacked, which we can certainly have further discussions on about. But it's about building that initial data set, getting that information to the required standards. And how that can be done. So yeah, I know there's some good work being done on that, so we can certainly pick up that as an idea, Paul. That's brilliant. George, next hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Paul on that, but also just give a little bit of additional context in what you were saying earlier. And I've got a couple of slides that would cover that, if that's okay.
Yeah, fire away, please do.
Yeah. Yeah, so just to explain the approach that we're taking, we've got the working groups. So the working groups are not, everybody in the development working group, for example, are not actually developers. We've got some people who are developers, some people project managers and designers, and these are focused on the various different stakeholder group interests. So the principle here for the operations group is to actually say, what are the real business issues that we're wrestling with, that we can then maybe encourage or help or get help from the other parts of the process, because at the end of the day, we either are starting with the information requirements or we're ending up as the recipients. And therefore, we're dependent on all of these other working groups. So the principle of the working group is then to come up with what is it that we require that can then be dealt with by work streams. So the working groups are, if you like, strategic, and then the work streams are looking at a particular task that we're addressing, and part of what Paul was saying there is something that we're actually looking at. So the ones that we've got as the initial established ones were for data standardization. So that's where we were working with HACT to develop both product data templates and the standard AIRs. And that's work that is still going on. And we've got some good content that we can share on that. There's MMC, which I'll skip over fairly quickly. The fire safety group, which a number of the people on this call have been involved with, Graham and others, Graham Camp from Catalyst and many others, have been involved in the roundtable sessions. Sustainability, we've got an initial piece of work was done as a survey, but we're actually now tying up with something called the Zero Construct team on that. So that's going to be doing a lot in terms of both operational carbon and also embedded carbon. And the other aspect that we're doing is looking at this whole area of that process of how do we create the digital record. And a lot of that, Paul, is actually looking at existing buildings. So we've already got the work from the Golden Thread initiative, where we've actually created a tool that can be used to do a self-assessment, and it's already got built into it the things that the documents and information that people say is going to be needed when you're putting together the safety case. So I think that's an important element. These are the questions. This is the answer to the question that I, or my answers. So on existing buildings, I think what we need to do is to simplify it by saying, why do we need the information? We need to ensure the building's operating effectively. Also, to address the safety and compliance issues, and I would argue also the operational carbon. And then on from that, making sure that we can keep that digital record complete and up to date. And then, as you say, Paul, on new build, that's where a lot of the BIM work's gone on at the moment to define the AIRs. But I think what we can do is give some examples of the work that we've been doing, for example, with Peabody and also with Origin, to reverse engineer their existing information and then create data containers to put things into. So I'll stop there, but it might be just showing the work that we've done with the Golden Thread might be a way through that. I've just realised that this is also what we've been doing on the with the round tables. So we've now got, Paul, for your definition of what information you need, we've now got very detailed documents produced for managing this information. So determining what information do you need to know about smoke control dampers. So this is all available for us to look at, and that Golden Thread safety case checklist that I mentioned a moment ago. You can go there and just view it and download it. And what we've now got is within that we've got a working group. Again, some of the members of this are on this call now, who are looking at defining what is required from a risk mitigation perspective. And we've also now got a group of tier 1 contractors who have agreed that they will work with their supply chain to deliver what it is that's being asked for. And I think that's really encouraging. So it means that we can then start to see what information do we procure. And then this is the work that we're doing with the duty holders to say, we've got a particular thing that we've got to do, which is demonstrate that we can protect against the spread of fire. And we do that via compartmentation, for example. And then we can say, from a data capture perspective, what assets do we need to create that compartmentation? And then we can then drill down to say, what information do we need to know about a fire door to ensure that it performs in its role as compartmentation? But the critical thing here is that from an operations and an asset management point of view, there's no point in just doing a fire door check if the wall itself or the fire stopping will still let fire through. So we need to look at this in a more joined up and integral way. And that's the approach that I'm going to be covering when we discuss this with the health and safety executive later. Right, sorry. Was that helpful?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you very much, George. That was absolutely brilliant in terms of helping understand how other groups are tackling and what the problems that we've got and and in terms of the output that's being produced. So that's really, really good. Dave, you've got your hand up. That's Mr. Williams.
Yeah. I was going to say one of the things that we were in the process of doing and found that there weren't standards, well, not any that I'm aware of within our particular sector, is even just down to the standard thing of having a component data dictionary which is standardized. So not only sort of component categories, but the actual names of components. I mean, we've been doing a working group internally, just going through all of the sort of key components of a building and coming up with what we're actually calling them. Obviously we've looked at what HACT has done, what BIM4Housing has done, COBE information, that sort of stuff. Uniclass, all of that, and then trying to find a correlation between what it's called out in the field, from particularly for legacy buildings, compared to actually naming that and putting it in the system. I'm sure that probably every one of us is probably using a system for asset management, of which a component is called something completely, different to what the other housing association is calling that same component, even if it's just within, naming it, whether it's called, glazed windows or windows glazed or just windows, or you know what I mean. So, and I just wondered what people's thoughts were about whether they've got that same issue where just coming up with a standardized data dictionary of components is an elusive thing. And and we have looked at Uniclass, but Uniclass often doesn't have the naming that, as I said, coming back to the sort of colloquial naming that's used out in the field, out in real operations, as opposed to something that's in a table somewhere. There's gaps in Uniclass, and there's also, in some cases, there's almost like an American naming as opposed to an English naming. So that was just my thoughts, really. I don't know what other people's thoughts are on that.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yes, definitely. Clearly, this labelling and naming issue is a problem. So Joanna's mentioned NRM3 from Rick's. Joanna, do you just want to introduce what that is?
Yep, sorry. It's the costing standard that the RICS use for new build.
Okay, and does that and that tackles a labelling problem for all sorts of building components, does it?
Yes. So essentially, NRM1 is, God, I can't remember, but NRM3 is about what materials go into a construction of a property, and it goes through everything that you can think of that goes into a building, and you could pick up a naming convention from that if you wanted to. I come from a sort of non-domestic building background, so I know that NRM3 links to the maintenance standard SFG20, and various organisations have gone out and mapped it to Uniclass, etc., etc. I think it's there or thereabouts.
I feel as though I'm saying too much now, but we've been doing a huge amount on this over this last year or so. And one of the things that we've been doing, both within the Golden Thread Initiative and also with the Data Standards Group within BIM4Housing, is addressing exactly this matter. So, shall I just show what we've been doing? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the challenges that we've had was exactly what Joe was saying there about doing mapping. And one of the things that we tried to do, for example, was to map Uniclass to, for example, SFG20. And the problem is that everybody calls something, as Dave was saying, everybody calls something slightly different. And the reason they're often doing that is for good reason, because they need to use it in a different way. So what we've done, this is the work that we've been doing with HACT. I don't know how much everybody knows about HACT, but it's actually supported by an international standards organization, data standards organization called OSCAR, who they are a little bit like Building Smart on the BIM side, but they're really there in terms of estates management. And what they've done is created a data model which includes COBie, but it also covers all of the other things that a housing association needs to be considering, like resident feedback and things like this. And part of my understanding of the need for it is where, for example, two housing associations merge and they might be using different software platforms, they may actually be using the same Keystone application, but they've set it up differently. And therefore, they need to be able to exchange the information. So they've got all of these properties actually defined as standards, so that, for example, service charge in one system can then talk to service charge in another, irrespective of how they've been set up in their own systems. So it's that sort of interoperability that HACT has been working on. So if you look at what we're trying to do, there's a range of different standards that we're wrestling with. So in the BIM world, the standard is IFC, which principally is driven by design. And they've created, over the years, there's been created a Building Smart Data Dictionary, which holds this information. So all of the individual properties as to what you call something, also all the sub bits of information, are in Building Smart Data Dictionary, but it's coming at it from a point of view of BIM and design. You've then got Uniclass, which is coming at things in a slightly different way, and we've got some great information in that, but there are some direct mappings between Uniclass and IFC, but we've also got things like BIM4Housing, which is the standard that CIBSE have produced, and they're not comfortable with some of the information requirements in IFC. So this is a parallel, but dedicated process. As Joe was saying there, we've got NRM 1, 2, and 3, which are different levels of information, but driven from a cost or a project management perspective. And the other big one that you might not be aware of is what all the wholesalers use. So that's called ETIM. So this is where product manufacturers provide their information through to people like Travis Perkins. So the ETIM classification is yet another one. So all of these are classifications that are designed for a particular purpose. And the approach that we've taken with this within the HACT group is we're doing stuff with BRE using this templater application. And the point about the templater is it's a neutral way of connecting to all of these different data dictionaries. So it means that all these different data dictionaries are being produced and managed by people that are specialists in M&E, for example, but we can then pull them into a common environment, which then also can be used by product manufacturers to create their data as well. So this is what the that we're using within HACT. What it allows you to do is to say that, say, for example, for a cavity barrier might be mapping to several different classifications according to what it's being used for, the context it's being used. Is it being used for design or cost management or fire stopping or whatever? And the important thing is that the naming of cavity barrier is then consistent, and that, I think, is the answer to the question that Dave's asking. But because this is a proper database, it's also connected to the IFC component as well. So it means that you've got a one-to-many relationship. Here we've got a heat detector, and this is one of the ones that we worked up. Jack Ostrowski provided us with this. And then what you're then able to do is say which information set. See here, for example, we've got sustainability, we've got electrical data, we've got performance data. All of these can be required, and they're all in these different data dictionaries. So the data dictionaries talk to each other. This is a bit geeky, but it's a way of actually pulling things together. So we've got a standardized set of information that says, for example, a heat detector, somebody that's an expert has looked at the heat detector and said, this is the information that we need to know about that. And then we're also then looking at what information is needed at which work stage, because not all information is needed right at the beginning of the scheme. And then finally, what you can do with this as well is turn off the things that you don't need. So you can say that as a manufacturer or as a maintainer, I don't need certain bits of information, so that can be then turned off. And we then use that to create data templates, which are then machine readable, which can then go into software applications. And that's we're actually using it via an API connection. But this is an example of what these are we've created these standard asset types. We've now got 250 of these as standardized asset types that have been compiled from different housing associations. But this second column is the important thing. What we're doing here is we're asking people to add synonyms to things as well. So whereas you might call something an air handling unit, somebody else might call it an AHU. And therefore, we then don't end up with multiple references or multiple asset types. We can have one asset type with different synonyms, but also connected through the templater to Uniclass, to IFC, to NRM, or whatever's appropriate. So if anybody's interested in that, let us know, because we can include you in the work.
Okay, Paul, I think you've got your hand up. Did you just put your hand up in the video?
No, I'd say I'm with CM. I'm interested, and I know Sue Wilbraham will be absolutely interested, because what you've just showed us will save me about 1 million hours worth of work, because you've got Uniclass on there, and we started looking at it using NHF 7.0 and seeing if we could map from there, which is where our repair system takes its data from, to map NHF 7.0 or 6.2 or whichever one they're looking at the moment in time.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that work. I absolutely don't want to have to try and map that thing. So I'm hoping that you lot have done this for me, because it looks like a nightmare to try and go through it. So yes, we would be very interested in understanding that bit, because that's one of our core issues about how information is going to get from day to day back into BIM. And if that's been mapped, we can work out a way of automating it, same as the rest of you. So
brilliant. Okay.
Great, thanks, Paul. Christine, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah. Now I think that bit of work looks wonderful, by the way. But I've been trying to sort of look at IFC models from the point of view of getting the data out of them. I was just thinking about what was said with the legacy system. So I know when you've got development, I am coming across these IFC files, and you can look at it, you can see all the dimensions of things, but it almost seems that if we've got legacy systems, then perhaps we should be building our own digital twin. So if you've got that sort of interim database, you could sort of say, I need to know about walls, and then you type it into your IFC file, and you actually start building up your digital twin, because then at some point, if you say, show us this, and you can see all these walls are missing or something because we haven't captured data, then you'll actually start seeing where you're possibly missing information because you haven't managed to construct a digital twin. So I think, yeah, we always seem to look at these things to pull the data out to put in our systems, but I don't think it's just occurred to me we've never sort of tried to build our existing data sets up to try and make the digital twin, so we can actually identify where we've got our data missing. So it's just, I thought I'd put that out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say, Christine, what I think in particular this group needs to do is identify what information is important, and then we come at it from that perspective to say, look at your O&Ms, and then create a set of requirements that we can then, or that you can then use to go through your existing records to draw out from that what is available. The likelihood is that a lot of the information won't be in your O&Ms, in my experience. I mean, we've just done an exercise on a project that was only finished 4 years ago, and it's quite shocking what's not in it. But there are circumstances where some of the important information is there, so you can come at it from that perspective.
Okay, thanks, George. Jack.
Yeah, it's just to say, you know, we have been doing a bit of work on this, and I would say for people just getting started, you know, I can think of one of our properties in an HRB that we've got, and on our system. The only component I could tell you that we have is a heat interface unit, and I couldn't tell you anything about it. So I think, you know, the first place to kind of start is just setting out, you know, as a kind of, you know, core asset management, which components, which elements are you looking to manage, and then, you know, get a full schedule of that for a building. And then, you know, just because we can come up with, you know, a list of criteria that we think are good for managing assets at the moment, you know, we will try and kind of integrate that into the business, and then they will say, oh, we don't need this, we do need that. So, you know, I think people don't, you know, it's better to make a start, you know, set out what you've got at the building, and then, you know, what information you need to gather will become clearer with time anyways. And so just making a start, finding out exactly what you've got that's relevant to what you want to do, whether it's just fire and structural safety at the moment, or whether it's wider, you know, get that in place, and then at least have a placeholder to capture that information against.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think that's one of the things that we learned from when we kicked off the Golden Thread Initiative project, is not to look at things from an individual asset perspective, but look at it from the point of view of what is it actually doing? What does it form part of that is actually, you know, what risk is it preventing, for example? So it might be a fire risk, or it might be an operational risk that means that, you know, something goes wrong, and then you know the tenants, you know, at the critical, at the worst situation, they've got to move out. So I agree, Jack, that it needs to come from the point of view of what can you gather, and also why are you gathering it? You know, what do you need it for?
Okay, so I suppose one of the interesting questions from my perspective is where to introduce BIM into this process, because we have established processes for asset management. We've got established, you know, digital processes potentially through our construction and development colleagues' work for the building of new buildings, but then when do we start having the discussion about BIM in organisations, and how to? I don't know if anybody's got any sort of organisational issues, as in resistance against the change that is inevitably coming as we move towards digital data models and managing that information. Or I wonder if people are actually finding that perhaps more straightforward because of the legislative work and the work that's happening with the working groups such as the GTI, the Golden Thread Initiative, and other groups that are demonstrating how we can achieve compliance for building safety and you know, fire safety and structural safety. Is anybody having any sort of organisational issues about having this discussion in organisations, or generally speaking, perhaps we're all switched on to this topic, but is there anything that we need to do in terms of making it easier for board level people perhaps to understand the benefits of BIM? And some of those more less technical issues, more about more nuanced issues. Luke.
Sorry, I joined a bit late. I had a contractor meeting, but it turned out it isn't going ahead now. So from what I found in L&Q, from my personal experience, is that we seem to have a grasp on certain specialist teams have a grasp on what BIM is and what we're trying to achieve for BIM. So we have a BIM team that are working on that. The issue comes when you go further down the chain, the people that are going to be using the data from BIM, the people that are going to be potentially keeping records up to date. And that's the issue. When you go further down, you're down to the operational teams. Those are the ones that struggle to see a benefit to BIM. And you can explain it in a, hey, you're going to get more data, but I feel like there needs to be almost a layman's guide to what the advantages of BIM are. So when, like you said, when you go to board members who aren't necessarily data minded, they might not be, because that might not be the area of the business. Or when you go to operational teams and you start talking to managers in smaller operational teams, that you need to explain to them, hey, this will benefit you and it will benefit cost savings and things like that. But there is an initial cost, and I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles, is the initial cost. There's the initial costs and the actual training of operational teams getting the rest of the business on board. I know that's something we've struggled with in L&Q, but we struggle with that anyway with large changes because of the size of the organisation, as you do with any large organisation. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea about how we're going to keep people engaged at all levels, because, again, as you said quite well, we're sort of all technical data geeks potentially on this call, and we understand, or at least are trying to understand, the issues, but it's about how to inform other people about that process as well. Actually, I found, just put on personal journey, finding out about all the technical, not all, many of the technical ins and outs of BIM has been quite a difficult journey, and I've had to sort of subscribe to courses and go through certification on various items in order to consume some of that knowledge, as well as being involved in this group, which has been really helpful. So
yeah,
okay, so we've Paul, I'll come to you in a second. Sorry. Oh, actually, sorry, Dave, kick in.
Yeah, I know. I was just going to echo what Luke said, and that sort of alluded to the point I made earlier on about the difference between what is technically sort of described in things like IFC, etc., compared to what it's called on the ground, and that's often where the issues are, because people tend to call the spade a shovel.
Yes, or yes, left or right-handed soil moving implement. Paul, you had your hand up next. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, mine was, again, mostly in agreement with Luke. One of the problems I'm finding is everyone understands the need for the new stuff, and they understand that we've got to do it for the legacy stock. I think a lot of senior management don't understand quite how bad the data is from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and how in some cases it is absolutely non-existent. I mean, it's especially if you've done like a council stock transfer at LST or the such like, then I think a lot of people at various levels from junior to senior don't actually realise how much work it will be to try and get legacy buildings on BIM, because the data just isn't there. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And if it did exist, it was in a council basement that got flooded 25 years ago type of affair. And trying to make people understand that it will be a big investment, but there will be a payoff down the line that's not necessarily to do with building safety cases, is something that we need to promote, because that's where we're getting the resistance. It's like, well, what do you mean you need to spend this much money to get a point of light survey and the such like? And we need to explain better why these things aren't needed from legacy buildings.
Okay. So I think that's an interesting point you're making there about data quality. So, and one thing that we're looking at doing on our side as a software provider is providing measures for data quality, so that it's easier to explain to people where there are gaps. So you've talked about having a model and what's the missing data, and potentially seeing a tree and grayed out stuff or whatever, but actually looking at a property and going, well, for this block of flats we've only got 21% data quality. And also considering, as you've mentioned, the aging of data. If it's not been recently updated, it can't necessarily be trusted or relied upon anymore. We're looking at how we can use those ideas in terms of aging stuff, because it's important to note when data is being collected, as well as just the fact that it is this. We have a fact: these walls were brick. Well, okay, well, when were they brick walls? And maybe the brick hasn't changed, but when does that information date from? So sorry, somebody else was going to pick up. I know George has got his hand up, actually. George, sorry, we'll follow proper protocol. Hands up, please, George.
Yes, yeah. So I just picking up on that. One of the things I'd like to just reiterate is just making sure that we're talking about BIM as being better information management. Yeah, because the minute we talk about BIM many people think that means a 3D model. And I think that's one of the big alienating factors here, because it means that people are immediately jumping to the conclusion that what you're talking to me about is a 3D model. Whereas really a 360 photograph in a spatial context is not equally, well, in fact, in some ways, it's actually, that's very much part of BIM. The other thing I would say is that it's also a matter of being able to communicate with people in a way that they understand why information is actually useful. So I had something recently where we got a housing association that was the engineer was having some real difficulties because of leaks that were coming through, and this is a 10-year-old development, and they were really struggling to understand who was responsible, and the record information, etc. And I was trying to we solved his immediate problem. We got him the documents that he needed, but I said, right, what we need to now do is to understand what are the problems, what are common problems that you have, and what information, therefore, would you expect that documentation, that as-built information, that BIM information to actually provide? And it was incredibly difficult to have that conversation, because all he could think of was, I just need access to the as-built drawings. And I said, what about the schedules? Yeah, I need those as well. But what do you, and I was trying to tease out from him, what information would he then want to extract from those? Because what we need to do is make sure that the information is there. And one of the things I would like to suggest is this group could actually identify common problems and common scenarios that we can actually have as questions, things that go wrong on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and then maybe a catastrophic or a periodic basis. And then we can use those. If we create those as in the IT world, it's called use cases. So if we can create those as scenarios, we can then test our information against that, and then we can then come at it from the point of view of how do we prevent this particular problem happening. One of the things is the ironmongery schedules, which actually become really quite important when you need to replace some of the ironmongery or the locks or something like that. Often that isn't properly referenced against the door types, and if it isn't, then we need to pick that up and find a way of dealing with it. Anyway, that was my.
Okay, so into the last couple of minutes, I don't know if anybody else, I'm just looking, there's a hand up, but I think that's possibly George's still, so that's fine. There we go. Sorry, lots of scrolling up and down on this side. So we've got 5 minutes or so before we start to close the meeting. In terms of other challenges that we've got, so I'm picking up on some points about applying to retro BIM. I think it would be useful if we were to spend some time looking at how we can apply and use BRE Templator and the tools that George was discussing there as well. I think that would be extremely helpful to us. I like this idea of picking up a set to others, the challenges that we're facing in terms of managing the operational phases of buildings. I hope I'm not breaking up. I hope my data quality is okay at this point. Does anybody have any other challenges that they want to highlight?
Alex, the meeting's running until 12:30, by the way.
Oh, fine. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, good. Right, panic over then. I'll reset my timer. Right, carry on then. Are there any other discussion points that I want to be picking up on? Sorry, Luke.
So the secondary point is, it's all well and good getting data and having the teams on board with why we need the data and being able to explain to them this is how it will benefit in a very layman's terms. then
Yeah.
the issue comes from, so we currently have teams that are working on trying to implement BIM into our new buildings. But we have, when you then move across, there's always that gap between development and operations in any company, there seems to be. And that gap, when you go into operations, the systems that you use, the IT systems you use, change completely, and none of them are suitable for anything even close to BIM. So an issue I came up with, or I came up against, would have been about 6 months, 7 months ago now, was maybe a little bit longer than that, but it was about, we were going to go out and start doing surveys of our buildings, stock condition surveys. So I started putting forward a case to say, hey, we should collect more data on this. We shouldn't just collect the basic data. But the issue when it got to that point was, there was a couple actually. One, they wanted to get the surveys out as soon as possible. So we had to use a framework. So it meant that a lot of the framework contractors don't carry out surveys to the detail that we were looking at. The second one was nothing against Keystone. I know with Civica, but Keystone doesn't have the ability to store data at this level, and that's the IT system we're using. So the limitation came from, well, we can't really collect this, because if we collect it, it's just going to sit in a PDF the same way as all our O&Ms do. So that will just end up being a box in the basement in 10 years' time. It might as well be, if you have a PDF stored in 30 files, folders deep. I mean, one I opened was 800 megabytes, and you couldn't even open it. But yeah, that's the issue. There isn't. I feel like to actually get BIM working, you need both the development and the operations and IT working at the same time on the same project. It's a whole company project. It's not just, we want to bring in BIM, whether that's better information management, and it needs to be whole company at the same time. And that's where the issue comes in. And then it's often blocked through funding. And you go, well, we're going to need to spend millions on an IT system, BIM, and collecting the data all at the same time to make this work.
Yeah, I'll just mention, I know he's not on the call actually, and I don't know if he's on the invite list even. I think he probably is at the moment. John Shaw from Live West has been tackling the problem of holding detailed building information, BIM style data in, shall we call them, legacy systems like Keystone, and has come up with some innovative sort of workarounds. But it's very much, you're looking for out the box support for that sort of stuff as well. So there's some way to go on that, and yeah, next generation products are coming. So, but yeah, I hear there's the organisational piece as well. So I realise that wasn't just a criticism of software providers, but I clearly understand. Yeah, there is an element of organising so that we're getting the information handed over, so that people are prepared to collect this more detailed information. It's a shame that you weren't able to collect that information when you were commissioning your new stock surveys, wasn't it? So yeah, that seems like a great missed opportunity. And John's particular challenge was he wanted to be able to answer all sorts of sort of spatial type questions to say, tell me all the buildings in my housing stock of, whatever it is, tens of thousands of assets that he looks after. How many assets have they got that have got cladding of a particular type that's above the first floor, second floor or above, and that's just a use case for me to look at how we can make sure that we're collecting that data in the future and spotting where it's missing on buildings, and filling that information in.
So it's not just on software providers. I get that. It also comes down to a lot of people in operations have always done the same way they're doing it. They've always done it this way, and it's worked, because every issue, every problem they come up against, they create a specific workaround, and this is the hidden work that happens. Is you come up with an issue that could have been solved by just having proper data. But what someone does is, someone in the company will just go, oh, well, I can fix this by doing blah, blah, blah. And they spend 3 or 4 hours sorting out this issue, resolving it. And they're like, great, it's done. But then if that issue ever comes up again, they have to repeat that same process. And the hidden work that happens is all of those hours of work that we don't know because we struggle to record them, that people are doing to cover for the inadequacies of our data.
Airtables. That's what people are doing all the time, and it's a nightmare. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we'll go to Lisa next.
Hi there. I'd put my camera on, but I've gone sideways and I don't know how to put myself back to
Okay,
normal
no
position. I was just, one of the things I've been looking at with some of the app developers out there and the software compliance workbook, True Compliance, is about having a QR code on the doors of all the blocks, so that every time someone enters that block, that's scanned and it can link back into your, so anything that's done on that block, you will have a kind of data set that will feed back into BIM. I don't know if that's something that others have potentially looked at, because that's what I thought the quickest way, because I think everyone's quite right. Everyone goes out and carries out work, and then you turn up to inspect a build and then think, who done that and where's the certification?
Yeah,
so we're looking at.
We've tried it. We've tried it. It's good.
Oh, okay.
We've tried it. I think I might have went through that with you, George, but we trialed that with the QR codes.
Yeah, I think QR codes are an essential part of the process. It doesn't quite address the point that Luke was making in terms of the master asset information data set. And what I would say, Luke, is that, you know, I mean, I don't want this to be a sort of promotional thing, but that's exactly what Active Plan is doing. It's providing an asset information model, which can deliver information and take information from Keystone and other applications. So, and it's not a matter of in our world now, all of these databases should be able to interconnect and talk to each other. So therefore, it doesn't have to be a big, expensive solution. As long as you've got the data model set up properly, which is basically what we're doing with Hacked, it means that all of this information can be in a virtual world of interconnecting. Therefore, you don't need to be constrained by any one software application.
So I just think on Lisa's point about asset tagging as well, that's really interesting. So the idea of obviously QR codes are extremely helpful. There's a couple of different ways that QR codes can actually be used, I think. So that you were talking about having them sort of on the, or perhaps on a door frame of a building, for example. So as you can call up information on that building. And there are some innovative bits of work being done. There's a company called Twinned IT who've done a BIM demonstrator with, I want to say it's Warwickshire Housing Association. I'm not sure that that's actually right. They've done a well-publicised demonstrator of information sharing where they're providing information to residents. Actually, the QR code pops off to a portal and they're showing a 3D model of the building, but they're also showing fire safety evacuation routes and sort of simulating how people will be able to escape from various floors and levels in a building, which kind of opens up away from having the discussion in the organisation and the asset management teams and the maintenance teams onto the actual occupants of the buildings as well, which are, I think, our concern in this group is how we're going to engage with residents on this information. The other area that QR codes are proving very useful for is evidencing that the checks are actually being performed properly. So if you imagine you're going to a large building, it might have 400 fire doors, and you're being asked to go around and inspect that all the fire doors are proper, whatever that might mean, closing properly in good condition, and so on and so forth. You actually want to make sure that you've been to all of those doors. So incorporating a QR code onto every door can actually prove that you can do an audit to show that you visited all of those doors and check those. And the other angle on QR codes is the more hidden stuff on RFID tags as well. So increasingly bits of equipment are being provided with RFID tags built in, and potentially we can capture that information and incorporate that into these the sort of checks and balance processes that are happening as well. So I think asset tagging is definitely all about it. Yeah, they're good. There's good systems out there. Alistair's talked about Hilti as well. So that's there as well. That's really good.
Could I just ask a question of the team? One of the things that we're looking at the moment is we're doing more on sensors, and one of the ideas that we were kicking around is whether, for example, on fire doors you could put a sensor that controls whether it's closed or not. Now, one of the suggestions that, or one of the observations that was made, was that tenants might then just take it off again. And that's, I know that's a problem with you know, in schools, for example, when we tag things in schools, often the kids, you know, will try and prize them off, as it were. Do you think it is practical to have a sensor that would the same type of sensors that they have in offices?
No.
Yeah.
It take far too much resource to try and manage that. I mean, if a door is propped open for a little while, do we send someone out? Is it a week? Is it a, you know, it's impractical.
Yeah, I similar lines there, George, to what Jack said. I think the theory is good. I think the practicality would be very hard to control and manage, and you know, you probably put another check and balance into it. I think the theory is good, but I think it'd be hard to control.
Yeah, that was what I was concluding, actually. But it was something that was being promoted to me, so I thought I'd check it.
I'll just mention my experience from fire service activity, asset management in fire service. They do quite a lot of checks of equipment, making sure everything's on a vehicle. So you can have an RFID loop that's at the fire station, so that when an engine arrives back from a shout, a job, all the equipment on board can be covered in RFID tags. But the issue with fire, there's several matters. The equipment, for example, ladders can get swapped between engines. So if they go to a big fire or a big event and there's 5 engines there, they can come home with a different ladder. And the ladders are regularly checked. They're subject to a regular check for safety checks. So they have to know which ladder is on which engine at what point. And if it's subject to a safety check, that's important. And to prevent these tags from being melted, for example, they're exposed to heat and a lot of water and all that sort of stuff. They actually embed them inside the equipment. So they drill holes in and put RFID tags into items. That's not quite the same as the IoT devices, which tend to be a bit more active in terms of measuring and transmitting information. In terms of auditing equipment in a place, there are things that can be done to sort of make them a bit more robust against you know, accidental damage or even deliberate damage. But yeah, IoT is a bit more fragile at the moment. I don't know if Jack had another hand up a minute ago, and I'm checking on the chat as well. James is making comments as well. Yeah, this business change, I think, is an important idea. How do we actually affect change to adopt BIM? I think that's an area that we should probably be looking at.
So is that in the chat? What do you want to read out? What?
Sorry, apologies. Yes, absolutely. So James is saying, Luke, I think your comments represent a very common issue. People's teams do and always have done what works best for them. Really, the implications, the actions on the rest of the business considered. You're 100% correct that there's a whole business change. It's a change in mindset and culture. So obviously, I think if we're going to get this adopted, you know, successfully across organisations, we need to change at all levels. So let's see what we can have a look at that.
We need to move them on relatively quickly, because we're going through that process here at MTVH, but we're being told 2 to 4 years. So the amount of time that BIM data for legacy buildings, or even actually new build buildings, are going to have to be manually managed could be as much as 4 years. That's an awful lot of user intervention and an awful lot of potential errors and an awful lot of resource that we can't afford and don't have particularly.
Okay, that's a really good point, Paul.
I think again it comes back, Paul, to starting at both ends. There's having you know, maybe a a 3D scan and, you know, a model being created and all of that sort of stuff, which is great stuff. But if you've got maybe 500 buildings to do, that's going to take a long time to do, no matter how much money is involved. And that's the other constraint. Whereas our recommendation is that you start at both ends of the equation. One is that you just basically start with a basic site plan, maybe with some floor plans, and then you can start to use that as a container that you can collect information against. So before we finish, I'll just show you again the questionnaire that we've made available. It's on the BIM4Housing website. You can actually use to go through this methodology of collecting the information through the process. I think if we can do that, you're then able to start the journey. It might take 3 years or 4 years to do it, but at least you're on a journey of collecting information, and then you're starting to build the right sort of data.
Okay, thanks, George. Pauline, I think you had your hand up, or you have your hand up. Hi, Pauline, you might be mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add the time. I think has been a big factor in terms of the operational teams buy-in to BIM, because in L&Q we've been talking about BIM and having BIM program running for a good number of years now. And over those years, the program has changed. It's had various iterations. Not all of the time that information is fed down to operational teams, and I think the teams have become a bit disillusioned or a bit interested. They've just continued business as usual from the initial enthusiasm that BIM is coming and how it was presented initially back in perhaps 2005-06. I think people did get the idea that by this time or a long time earlier than this, they would be this all singing, all dancing BIM, again being looked at as being a model, a total replica of our buildings would be in place. And as the years have gone on and there has been little progress and people have continued in the same vein as previously, the level of interest and even belief that BIM is going to be delivered anytime soon has kind of diminished over that period of time. Also separately to that, I've been recently looking at the handover process with one of our process analysts to try and see where we are in terms of the handover information, what we're getting and how we're using that and disseminating that. And it's, as we've spoken to more and more people in different teams, it's kind of led on to a bigger program, because we've realised that there doesn't seem to be one overall collection or collation or even understanding of all the various different data points where information comes into the organisation. And by talking to some of the other teams and other colleagues, it's becoming apparent that there are, as well as the number of different systems we've got, there's also other systems that we're not generally aware of. People have built in their own particular little bit of software that can do specific things for their area, whether it's I don't know, service charging or other areas, which are not necessarily being logged or considered in terms of the overall data or asset data programs. So, you know, it seems to me that there needs to be a more joined up, a bigger piece of work, looking at where all the data points are when information comes in, where that information goes, how many hands, what hands does it pass through, and for what purposes, where does that go, so that we could have a full understanding. to reach the point of being able to have one underlying complete data set of information.
That's really good, Pauline. It strikes to me, it seems to me, that is not an uncommon situation. I pretty much every organisation I talk to is in a similar situation. You've got disparate systems, you've got different groups responsible for different information, you've got different information needs along the way. The point on service charging is extremely important, I think, because that's the blood that keeps our businesses pumping on the sort of landlord side of things, to ensure that we can keep those buildings maintained and occupied. So yeah, and I think it comes back to the how to deliver that change, and a recognition. Actually, I don't think BIM is like you've done BIM. One day you're going to wake up and something, that's it, we've done BIM. I think really BIM is a process. It's an ongoing thing. There will be change. There will be improvements. We'll discover things will happen, things will change, and it's about making organizations fit and able to adapt to that change as we go. So it's a big one to pick up, but I think this idea of influencing that change is a key topic that people are keen to look on. So maybe we have a group that looks at that. Right, okay, looking at hands again. So I know there are comments happening as well, so I'll just check comments quickly. And we'll go to hands in a minute. So Joanna saying, I guess a key point is who using the data and for what. An office-based asset manager has a different need to any person completing any sort of physical work. Could we map that data need, or does that already exist? Question to George, I think. Different needs for different people, and I guess that mirrors very much what Pauline was just saying, really, along this journey. Different interesting idea that you've got your river stages, haven't you? And then once the river stages stop, once the building's built, but then we need some other stages that go beyond this, about the occupation phase and what's needed beyond that for different phases. So I don't know if George has got a view on that point, and we'll come to Luke next.
Yes, certainly. And I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier, and that is what we need to do is build more use cases to be able to look at how this information, what is it that we're actually trying to do? What do those individuals, what do those roles need to perform? And then we can have the right slice of information, which probably will cut across a range of different areas. One of the critical things, for example, is to look at a unit as a collection of spaces, so that you can actually say you're probably billing against a UPRN, but you're also looking at things from what are the space types that are in that UPRN as well, because you might want to look, for example, at kitchens, and you want to look at across that. So it's a matter, really, I think, of organising our information in such a way that it can be sliced and diced for different purposes.
Yeah, because you get to the interesting discussion point about organisations that have different charging models, for example, in blocks of flats where some residents are being charged for the use of the lift, even though they're ground floor flats. You have those kind of interesting complexities. Some organisations do that, some organisations don't. So there are some complexities in there. Sorry, going to hands then. Luke, you've got your hand up.
So I was going to say very similar with that is the whole BIM thing, similar to what George was saying, is you collect a view of everything. So you collect everything you can possibly collect, and then you create individual views for the people that need them. So the office-based asset manager will have a view for an asset manager, and the person completing the work might have a view that also contains drawings or something like that. So that's kind of what you do with that point, but it's getting to collect all that data in the first place. But my other point was, it's gone. My brain has just left. It's just left.
Okay. That's fine. It's the pressure of being live.
Oh,
No
no.
problem. Mike's picked up on the point about River Stage 7 in use, which is great. And I must admit, again, I'm not an architect, so perhaps I need to go and look at that in more detail and understand what's there. Go on, Luke.
George's point. So George's point about we need use cases. So what I'll do when I go away from this, because I've now moved to an operational team, a contract manager for the electrical department. So what I'll do is, if I get cases and things that have come up where they quite often come back to me to try and resolve, where I'm having to do something that requires me to find data that should be present already, what I'll do is I'll scribble those down and bring those along or forward those along when I find these use cases. But I think that's probably the way to do it, is for everyone in this group that is in a situation where they come across someone says to them, hey, can you get hold of an O&M for me? When in theory, they're looking for a very specific bit of information, and that should be available on the asset management system for them to view. And you almost, yes, you might go and get that for them and say, here it is. But then you want to record, well, actually, that's taken me an hour of my day to just find this one bit of data from an O&M for this one case. And there's potentially hundreds of those. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right, and what you just said there, Luke, mirrors my experience as well. Because people are saying, just give me access to the O&Ms, yeah. And with the fact is that they'll probably invariably they'll look at the O&Ms, they can't find what they need, so they say the O&Ms are rubbish, and therefore, you know, they'll either not do it or whatever. Whereas actually, if you actually understand what they're actually looking for, there are ways of possibly getting that information.
So I guess an example that came up for me, I mean, I alluded to it earlier. One of our sites, we've got an O&M manual, very, very comprehensive. It's a PDF document that is 800 megabytes in size. So it means that no one's computer can open it. And the only way we can open it, the only way I found to open it, was using our Azure Microsoft server, so using Microsoft's software system to open it on SharePoint, essentially. I was essentially using that just to get information about the lifts. All I wanted was the lift makes, models, serial numbers, whether they were firefighting lifts, so just basic information about the lifts to confirm. And I spent several hours. One, I had to try and find a solution to open this document because I asked our scheme adoption team at the time and they weren't able to open it. I found the solution open on the Azure server. And then the second one was trying to find the relevant parts within this document that was thousands of pages long. And yeah, for a lot of people, I was determined to get that information, but for a lot of people, they would open that or they would look at it and go, I can't open it. It's not working. O&M's not relevant, which actually it isn't suitable for purpose. You have to go through all that to open it. There's a use case.
Absolutely. Alex, before we finish, because we've just got 10 minutes, I'd just like to show what we've actually got on the BIM4Housing website for everybody to be able to access. So I can do that now, or we can do it later.
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine. I think I'm having some bandwidth issues at this end, which is one of my videos off, by the way. So please proceed.
Okay. So this is where we're at the moment. A number of you have probably seen this, but we've created this black box page. You see, and there's two elements that I'd like to just show you. What one is, this relates to what we're just talking about there. These have all been extracted from the roundtable workshops. So against different asset types, you know, for example, an AOV, I think Pauline came up with that one originally, being blocked by external scaffolding. And a roof light being used to access the roof. That was one that came out the round tables, because that means that the actuator is being used far more regularly than it would normally be expected. So we've just sort of put these in as simple things, and what we're hoping is that we can then start to capture photographs. So if, for example, a building safety manager is walking around and they see something as an example, then they could take a photograph of it and upload it here, and then that's something that we can share. So this is just something that I think could start to build a useful data set. The wrong type of foam being used for fire protection or whatever. But I'll just come back on here, and the main thing, this is where all the things from the round tables have gone as well. So, for example, for fire alarms, things like that, we've got here the publication of that. It's just coming up now. So there's a PDF of it. You can make comments on it, or you can download it. So that was it, really.
Yeah, there's a really good document. So I'm still making my way through the whole set and trying to absorb them, but it's definitely worth going on, reading the documents or doing the download request on there as well. So that's a great resource for us to hang on to. So in terms of I'm
sorry, this is the
that's fine. Yeah, that's the one. That would be very good to share. Yes.
Yeah, this is the document that basically you can go through and you can say, what information do you have about? Do you have all your sites? Do you have all have you got the spatial model of the site? So these become containers into which you can put your information. So this becomes then a methodology of have you got floor plans? So the purpose of this is to say this information, you can then use this to collect the information that you're going to need when you sit down and start to produce your safety case. And what we've done in terms of the individual data sets. I've lost that.
Sorry, George, can I just ask, at the end of that questionnaire, the golden thread questionnaire, what does the checklist, what does that actually produce? Or is its purpose to act as a primer for you continue further activities, or what's the result at the end?
Yeah, what it's designed to do at the moment is to provide a process of saying, what information do you need about a building? So, what's the height of the building? Have you got the external information, for example? And then it then goes into the next level. Have you got the percentage of cladding, for example? Now, what we've got these as, this is probably better represented actually as a document, but we put it into this questionnaire because we thought it would be easier for people to complete. And then, but this is the document itself, which again, you can get. So what we're saying here is this is the information that's needed about a building. This is the information that's needed about the systems or the floors, the units, the asset types, the information that you need about those, the information you need about individual instances. So we go through this process. So I think that's a useful thing for us to be using. I think Pauline's had a crack at that. And what are the challenges is that the feedback that we had was that it may be that one person, it's unlikely that one person is going to be able to answer all of this. So it needs to be a collaborative effort. So that's why we put it into the Teams or the Microsoft Forms format. But anyway, so that's what that's about.
Okay. Thanks, George. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I've been having some problems here. So we've got a final comment, I think, from Brett, and then I just want to draw the meeting to a close.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just a quick question really on the back of the information that George has sent us. We've got an asset review going on at the moment, and one of the questions because a lot of our data at the moment is either stored at asset level or different levels of blocks. And with regards to that, the management system that George has just shown us, what is defined as a block? Because we find that a block could be the entire building. It could be an individual communal area, which a building may have several communal areas. So it might be identified in some systems as several asset blocks, whereas actually it makes up physically as one block. So we're actually just trying to design an architecture of data at the moment and defining what's a block and what's a sub block and so on. I just wondered if other people are finding that issue and what if there's a solution.
I'm so glad you said that, Brett. Honestly, I thought I was the only idiot left. But we're still having an argument of what constitutes a block. We haven't really moved much beyond that, I'm afraid. I was hoping you've got some answers as well, because we aren't doing well on that question.
I was going to say, at our end, funny enough, the way we ended up having to classify sub-blocks of physical, buildings was based on entrances and exits, and this was because fire risk assessments are invariably always based on a different fire risk assessment if there's a different entrance exit to the block. So if you've got, say, a block that has basically got 3 cores with 3 discrete entrances and exits for fire escapes, etc., then we ended up with having to have fire risk assessments for each of the 3 sub-blocks. So that sort of drove how we classified it. So it was looking at the discrete cores. So if you had a situation with a block where it had, say, corridors and entrances and exits that serviced the entire building, then that would be a block with 1 core, if you like. Whereas if you say had it where it had separate entrance and exits, so you couldn't traverse from one part of the building to the other part of the building, or it had separate lifts, etc., then we'd split the block into sub-blocks. I don't know if that helps, but
it's kind of what we was going down the line of, but then we found the added complication, whereas if we denoted, because if a block had a 1 fire risk assessment, so we call it a block, and I work in the fire safety team, so that was my idea, was pretty black and white. But then our M&E team would come up with, well, that those 2 blocks that you've got 2 fire risk assessments are supplied by 1 electrical system, and therefore we call that 1 block. It kind of, that's where it gets confusing and the arguments start.
Yeah, I mean, we do it as a parent-child relationship anyway. So the components can sit at any of those levels. It can sit at unit level, space level, sub-block level, or block level. And there's only a few components that invariably could flip between block and sub-block.
I don't think you need to look at it in a hierarchical way either. We're all using relational databases now, so that shouldn't be a limitation. Just in COBie terms, the term is facility. So we map block against facility, but it might be that you've got an energy centre on the site, which would be that's a separate building and needs to be treated as such.
Okay. Right. I know that we've got some other hands up, but I'm sort of desperate to make sure that this meeting runs desperately on time to prove that we can be very efficient and deliver what we said we would do. So if people are not desperately offended, if you want to put your points into chat, we can carry on the chat afterwards. But I want to release people. I'll be writing up some minutes on this meeting over the next week or so and circulating those around. I think I've pulled out 4 activities that we might be looking at doing. So in no particular order, looking at how we can aid organisations in applying BIM to existing buildings, which is a very big ask and not a task we'll necessarily report back on in success within the next 8-week period. Looking at helping with name tagging, and that might map into the sort of demonstrator, if you like, of the BRE templater. But I think I'd quite like to see an example of how that templater might be working, and just maybe that's just a demo that we need from that. These points on organisational change, so affecting change in organisations, it's all well and good, you know, us doing great work on BIM, defining information requirements and collecting and managing that information, but if it's not being used across the organisation, I think that's a great big miss. And then the creation of these use cases, I think, is going to be very helpful for us to aid discussions around those particular activities. Did anybody else pick up on any other points? Because I'm not my own best secretary.
I think that was pretty good.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. I'm going to play back the recording whilst reading my notes. So apologies to anybody who's still got their hand up or a comment that you need to make, but I want to keep this a tightly run ship. So our next meeting, if I just pull up the right screen, is in 8 weeks' time, and I got the date, but I've lost it. Hang on a minute. Where is it? Here we go. Next meeting is on the 27th, I want to say, of April. Yeah, 27th of April at 11 a.m. So GIS will be sending out meeting invites to those of you who want to come along to that. Let's continue the discussion in the chat and on this session if we want to do so, and I'll be reaching out to people who've indicated interest in any of these areas to see if we can pull together plans for those working groups. If you want to put your name forward for any of those activity areas, do you either want to put that into the chat after this call, or contact me directly, or George directly, or GIS directly? That would be fine. And the last comment I want to make is I'm also looking for people to co-chair and take some of the leadership burden over this year. So if anybody wants to step forward in terms of you know, running a meeting and coordinating with some of the activities that we're going to have, that would be greatly appreciated. I think a lesson learned from last year was that there's a lot for one person to take on board. So if we can come up with a team of 4 or 5 people who are prepared to spread the load a bit and work together as a group, that would be helpful as well. So thanks everybody very much for your time, and we'll gather again on the 27th of April.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Cheers, guys. Bye. Bye.